Suspicions first fell on the men at the dig. But some surprising revelations soon brought new faces under the spotlight. The most famous name linked to Piltdown was someone who couldn't have written a better mystery himself, the great writer and doctor, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Historian Richard Milner became fascinated by this great British eccentric when he learned of his connection to Piltdown.
Millions of people know Sir Arthur Conan Doyle as the creator of Sherlock Holmes and the father of the modern mystery story. But in fact, most people don't know that he was also a medical doctor, a person who collected fossils, an ardent spiritualist, and perhaps one of the perpetrators of one of the greatest hoaxes of all time, the Piltdown Man.
Conan Doyle was a colorful character with a theatrical flair. He was as keen on new inventions as he was on hunting fossils. He lived just 7 miles from Piltdown and moved in the same social circles as Charles Dawson.
Conan Doyle certainly knew the other people who were possible perpetrators and was a familiar figure at the site. He told Dawson that he was very excited about the find and would happily drive him anywhere in the neighborhood in his motor car.
Conan Doyle often passed close to the dig on his round of golf at the Piltdown course. He could easily have planted the fossils. But what would have motivated him?
Why would Sir Arthur Conan Doyle want to put on the scientific establishment? Why would he want to sneak around and make fools of some of the most respected people in England? Well, perhaps because they had tried to make a fool out of him.
Despite his medical training, Conan Doyle fell out with the scientific community because of his controversial belief in spiritualism, the ability to communicate with the dead. It was the latest craze sweeping the nation, and Conan Doyle became a fervent convert.
He believed that one could communicate with departed spirits. He believed in spirit photography. He attended seances. When he showed these spirit photographs to scientists, they laughed. They said, these are simple double exposures. This evidence is no good at all. You don't know what evidence is. And that's when Conan Doyle, I think, got very upset. And he said, I am the creator of Sherlock Holmes. You don't tell me that I don't know what evidence is. I will show the scientists that they don't know what evidence is.
Could the scientists' rejection of the spirit photographs have infuriated Conan Doyle and driven him to perpetrate the forgery? He had both the motivation and the opportunity. One theory says that he deliberately planted clues in one of his most famous books, The Lost World. Published in the year Piltdown Man was discovered, the book featured Conan Doyle in the guise of Professor Challenger, running an expedition to discover a mysterious prehistoric world.
You have all these wonderful clues peppered throughout the book. Sir Arthur himself as Challenger goes in his imagination into a lost world in Venezuela where dinosaurs and ape men still roam. And he wants to bring the proof back to England and show people this fantastic breakthrough. Members of his expedition say, how will they be believed? Well, we have these photographs. Yes, but photographs can be faked. Well, how about a piece of bone? And he says in his book, The Lost World, if you know your business, A bone can be as easily faked as a photograph. Well, if you're trying to figure out who planned Piltdown, and somebody says a bone can be as easily faked as a photograph, you start to think maybe Sir Arthur is trying to tell us something.
But if Conan Doyle created Piltdown Man to mock the scientists, why didn't he come right out and reveal how easily he'd fooled them?
One possible answer is that shortly after Piltdown was really going and captured everyone's imagination, a little something called the First World War came along. At that time, Conan Doyle was seriously engaged in political talk and in trying to influence the British government in the conduct of the war. So clearly, that was not the time in history for Conan Doyle to say to Parliament, here's how to conduct the war, and oh yes, by the way, I sprung that little gag about the ape-man in Sussex.
Was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle really the type of man to carry out such an outrageous hoax? If his own detective Sherlock Holmes were trying to solve the mystery, he would surely consider the culprit's personality. Conan Doyle was considered a man of truth and integrity. Would he really be prepared to see so many lives wasted in the fruitless study of Piltdown Man without obvious benefit to himself?
Well, it went so far beyond a joke or a prank that it did serious harm to people's lives. And frankly, that part of it makes me disinclined to believe it was Conan Doyle, because Conan Doyle was such a decent man that I find it impossible to believe that he could watch such suffering and waste on the part of these scientists and not confess to it, even at cost to his own reputation.
Although Conan Doyle had the means and motive to carry out the Piltdown forgery, it seems totally out of character. There was another, more obvious suspect who stood to gain much more from the discoveries. Most of what is known about Piltdown comes from Charles Dawson, the man who made the initial find. Although only an amateur archaeologist, his ambitions to make a name for himself in academic circles seemed limitless.
He was one of the foremost amateur antiquarians of his time. And so I think each one of his discoveries, his presentations to the Royal Society, presentations to the Antiquarian Society, presentations to the British Museum, increased his standing to the point where, had he not died in 1916, I'm sure he would have been knighted.
Although Dawson's reputation in his lifetime was untarnished, once the forgery was revealed, his name began to crop up as a prime suspect. Local gossip quickly revealed a darker side to his character. He was accused of being a cheat and a swindler after his dubious purchase of the grand townhouse, Castle Lodge in Lewis. Dawson sneakily bought the house from under the noses of the Sussex Archaeological Society, who had previously housed their museum there. He had no qualms about serving them with an eviction notice, despite having been a leading member.
The Society, of course, were up in arms about this. They had nowhere to go, they had nowhere to store their museum, and it took them a good few years to actually re-establish themselves within Lewis. And where they actually ended up a few years later was quite interesting from the point of view of the Dawson family, because they moved into Barbican House, which is not, 150 yards from the front door of Castle Lodge. And the Sussex Archaeological Society are still here today. They're still based in here. And you can imagine the Dawsons coming out of Castle Lodge, coming down, 150 yards down to the High Street. They would have come into daily contact with the members of the society, whom they had just only recently evicted. By buying that house and evicting them, he was effectively severing all links with the society. And I think that tells us something interesting about his character, in the sense that if he wanted something, he would get it, irrespective of anyone's feelings, and damn the consequences.
New revelations